Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. Joining us today is Eliza Knight, and we have Denny S. Bryce. I was so focused on making sure I have everything else correct, I almost screwed up the last name. Anyways, we are here to discuss their forthcoming book that'll be coming out in early March, called Can't We Be Friends? So thank you, ladies, so much for being here. Premise of the novel, because I have heard about Ella and Marilyn's friendship in the past, but like going into their stories together is so interesting and so much sounds like so much fun. But before we get into, well, actually, let's go ahead and start off with the synopsis. Let's, for those who are not familiar, let us know a little bit about the book.
Okay, I'll start.
You're good at starting.
About Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe and their friendship. But the real story is that Eliza and I started working on this book way back in 2019 when I lived in Washington, D.C. area. I can't remember where I lived in D.C. I live in Savannah, Georgia now. But we were hanging out as we usually did once a month, back and forth between our two homes, and just for a write-in. And we stumbled across some research on the Macombo Club that eventually led us to what's her name? Ella Fitzgerald. I keep wanting to call her Eliza Fitzgerald. And in that, because Eliza and I are talking, she has many names, in other words. But I know Eliza, and I was like, it's because it's an E, and my first real name is Elizabeth. So just this whole endless thing of Ella, Eliza, Elizabeth. So anyway, it's been a joy working on this novel for all of these years and finally having it out in the world on March 5th, 2024.
I think that's like the most exciting thing too, is like this project started from just like a rabbit hole jump down some history that we found fascinating and we couldn't stop talking about it. And like for years we would come back to it and be like, oh my God, we really need to tell this story. And then finally we were like, let's just start like making some spreadsheets and go crazy here. And the story really came together, and that's like the coolest thing ever, that we got to share a little known history about these two awesome women and the friendship that they had that seemed to kind of like be hidden almost from the public eye, except you can find little pieces of it. Like one of our favorite things that we found was an announcement in I can't remember which publication it was. It might have been Jet Magazine, but it said Friends album coming from Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe. And they had signed a record deal with RCA. And then this like record deal just fell apart and never came to fruition. There was never anything else written about it. And so like what happened? That was one of our big questions. Like, okay, clearly they had this album they were putting together. They titled it Friends, and then it fell apart. Like, how did that happen? So that was another really big question we had that we wanted to kind of explore when we were writing this book.
Yeah, very much. And then there's that clip of Marilyn Monroe mentioning, excuse me, her favorite person is Ella Fitzgerald. And it's just an interview. And she just, yes, I'm going, with her soft voice. The other thing that we had fun discovering through listening to all of the research that we did, not just Marilyn in film, but Eliza, I did it again, Ella. And
I'm not a singer.
But to research Ella, I played a lot of her live concert recordings. So you could hear her voice. And then just in general, Ella Fitzgerald's speaking pattern was so similar to Marilyn in terms of that soft, whispery voice.
Yeah.
And that was funny, that just to discover these similarities and these moments where they certainly had a deep friendship, but back during the 1950s, it wasn't something that would be publicized. A Black woman and a white woman being besties. was not something that was a part of the news cycle.
Right. And their publicists, I think, hid a lot of stuff
Oh yeah.
from the public eye, which is why you don't see it very often. And I mean, you read these biographies, and in many of the ones that we read for the research of this book, don't even mention the other person. And it's like, how can you not mention them? And they were such a big part of their life, which is really sad that it's sort of buried, which is another reason why we were like, we have to share this story, because people aren't really talking about it.
Right. And the misogyny of that time period, in addition to the racism, just made it even more understandable why there was no mention of their friendship in these biographies, in these news stories, except for rarely. And that sort of thing just wasn't discussed or talked about.
Right.
You know, you have, I mean, even we visited some websites, some fan websites for Marilyn, for example, that still exist and thrive, where they will totally deny even her, not just the friendship between her and Ella, but Marilyn's civil rights activism that was a part of who she was as well. But those topics were not the Marilyn Monroe that some of these websites that we saw wanted to explore or expose in any fashion. So, and then on Ella's side, she's so private, so someone who just didn't get out there a lot, so had to dig through quite a few news stories, quite a few, like Jet Magazine, Essence Magazine, but also just day-to-day newspapers and international newspapers, because she was so well-traveled, and lots of craziness happened to her while traveling. So much story, so much story.
There's so much. And we had to like cut so much of what we wanted to. I think at one point our editor was like, yeah, you need to cut like 120 pages. And we both sort of just cried for a little while.
Yeah, no, she cries, I curse. There was not a tear shed.
That's a great friendship right there.
I shed all the tears.
Yeah. But yeah, it was quite a few pages that were gone. But that was a good note.
Yeah.
The point of the story is their friendship, and there was just so much to the women prior to what led them to each other, but that isn't the point of the book. So where we began is where it should have begun, and so it worked out, and we're very pleased that we're having quite a few comments from Goodreads to the people who wrote the blurbs, some great authors who read the book and putting the word out there that they really enjoyed it. And that's always exciting when you get readers like that.
Yeah. They're loving it, and they keep talking about, like, you know, the friendship and how much they, you know, are learning, but also like how much the friendship was moving them personally while they were reading. And I think that's like another big message that we wanted to share, was about like women's relationships and friendships. And I'm just like so happy that people are like getting it, you know?
Yeah. Because that the 1950s just was a time period of extreme change in women's life post World War II, when you had more women during the war working out of the home, really taking charge of their household. And that occurred in the Black community as well as across the board. So then you hit the 1950s and all the soldiers come back and all of the racism ignites even stronger during the 1950s with some very traumatic, tragic events. But there's a version of womanhood that is promoted through Hollywood that really put people like Marilyn and Ella, just, what's the right word? I think it's narrowed their opportunity to have the kind of lives that these two intelligent women who were very ambitious, very smart, wanted to have. Because Hollywood and or the jazz scene and managers and all the people that you had to work with, men.
And their husbands.
And there we go. I mean, there were some of our off, Eliza and I would chat about some of these husbands, especially on the Maryland front.
Ugh.
That's when I could actually get Eliza cursing. She was like, "Oh!" I said, "Is that what it was like?" Yeah, it was tough. It was tough on these gals, and their love lives fed into who they were. Most definitely.
Yeah.
So quite a bit of stuff.
I know, it's so fascinating. And one of the things, going back in the conversation from earlier, the fact that you guys started writing this in 2019, because I know readers, when you say, oh, I started writing this book in 2020 or 2019 or so on, readers are like, oh, because there's other books that come out and there's other things that are happening, and they just think that you're just writing this one book in this vacuum. And it's fascinating. It's to actually talk about it, that 2019, that's what, 5 years ago now. It's because it's 2024, not 2023.
Yep.
Because again, Diana, we have moved on to the next year. So being able to balance that, let's talk about that for a moment, because you both had other projects that have come out in those years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. Because my debut novel, because I am a baby writer, came out in 2021. Okay, now since 2021, this year I have 2 more releases. So by the end of this year, I will have had 5 books written. And for me, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a baby writer too. I'm still waiting on my 3rd book to get picked up. So it's a lot, and it's fantastic, and that's so exciting.
It's great. It's crazy making. And part of our challenge, because we had this story schemed out, and before, I'd say in 20.
Yeah.
It sold in 21, early 21, I believe.
Either 21 or 22. It was due in early 23. I think we contracted early 22, but we had already written chapters and had the synopsis, everything done by we submitted it late 2021. You're right, and we signed the contract in 22.
Yeah. And the thing about that process is that in between we all had other contracts and books too, and we made a decision at some point in time, because we kept saying, well, we have to finish this or da da da. We just made a decision to push through and just say, okay, we got to get it out there, because we know this book needs to get its audience and be out in the world. And so what ended up happening was that we told our agents it's time, and they sat back and said, okay. They pitched it, and the next thing we knew, we were in an auction situation, which was terribly exciting. That was my first time for that. And from there, we were just like, okay, let's go. So it's also, I don't know, I think in between contract signing and now, I think you wrote, Eliza, you've written 2 or 3 books, and I wrote 2. Yeah, so we were multitasking, bottom line.
That's the writer's life, right? And I write in 2 different genres. So I've got my historical fiction face, and then I have my romance face. So I'm always doing different projects there. But at any given time, you guys both know this, you are actively writing, actively editing, actively promoting, actively plotting, and actively like pitching all at the same time, different projects. They're just in different stages. And that can be crazy making. But you know, ultimately it's just about like making that choice. Like Denny said, we were like, you know what? It's time. We're putting this as a priority and we're gonna, you know, push through this. And there were definitely times that we would be like on the phone, like just both of us deliriously tired because we were working on this book at the same time as also trying to work on our other projects that were due. And I had 2 books due within 2 weeks of each other. This one was one of them, and that was like madness.
Yeah,
So
I can't even remember what I was working on because I work for publishers. So I'm with William Morrow and Kensington.
mhm.
I might have been, oh yeah, I remember now. No further comment. It was just hectic. It was just
Yeah.
hectic. But also then you try to have conversations with people and all of the characters step into the same world. And that's never good. Never good. You know, it's just like, again, crazy making. I'd say that if you, going back to Ella and Marilyn, the thing that I discovered during the process, and I'm going to turn around and ask Eliza the same question. The biggest discovery that surprised me about Ella, because that was a key to my research, I was spending a lot of time on that, had to be her decisions about her managers. I was surprised about her relationship with her 2 managers, and then just the evolution of how she was tireless.
Mhm.
I think that's what surprised me the most. She was tireless. She just worked, and it was an obsession. It was
Yeah.
talent. It was an obsession. She
Yeah,
had to be on
we
stage.
talked a lot about like behind the scenes to each other about the fact that, you know, Marilyn had her vices and addictions, and it seemed like Ella did too, but hers was work. Like
Yeah,
she was addicted to that stage, addicted to working, um, and needed it, like thrived on it, like couldn't do life without it.
exactly. She
I
was
wonder
also
if
the money.
oh, money,
Yeah.
yeah. Money's always a big
Yeah,
factor.
money works.
She loved
We need
cars.
money.
She loved fur coats. She liked the things that money could buy.
It's
Most
very
definitely.
interesting. And sometimes when you think about like the addiction side of things and being addicted to work, and especially if you're a creative, that
Mm,
line gets blurred so easily. I know as a writer, but also thinking about it from a point of view of maybe like a singer or like an actress, that working addiction, because it's a thing that you love and
Yeah.
it feeds your soul in a lot of ways, but yet you're constantly having to work and strive to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just such a very interesting
mhm.
dichotomy. And thinking about it from of Ella, it's just
I
that's
Well,
think most
and it's
creative.
like not something you ever like leave. Like, you know, people who have regular day jobs, like they go to work and then they come home and they don't think about it. I mean, sometimes they do, but they don't have to think about it. And like for an artist, like a singer, she's constantly thinking about her throat, constantly thinking about lyrics, rhythm, and also probably for her, music was just in her head all of the time. The same sort of, yeah, like for us, our characters are just always there. We can't like shut our office door and be done with it. They wake us up at night, and I'm sure
Mhm.
for a vocalist, it's the same way.
It's totally the same. Not that
Yeah.
I can sing that well, but show business wise, just any creative. I think that that's why sometimes, as a writer, since I've had experience as an entertainer, that I am so comfortable in that obsessive state of mind because I've been there
Yeah.
for my entire life. I started dancing when I was 16 or 17, and before that I was a cheerleader. So audience and communication that way, I don't see that much difference between a singer and a writer, really. I just don't. You're 24/7 with it, and as Eliza said, wakes you up at night, puts you to sleep at night. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. If you're in a room visiting friends and you can't help but talk about it, and they're just like, okay, do you do anything else?
No, I don't.
What else is there? Okay. You show them the crazy part. What do you mean?
Well, my friends know if I'm working out a pitch about a book, I'm like, I was talking to them like nonstop. Like I had a Disney day with like some girlfriends, and all I could do was talk about like a pitch that I wanted to do in a book, and I'm just like, talking about it and like sounding it out with them because I'm like, okay, I know you guys are readers and I know this is your genre, so let's just go ahead and talk about this while we're waiting in line for Indiana Jones, okay?
Yep. Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
It's the way of the world, and the rest of the world just needs to understand and deal with it.
Right. Well, and like if you're like staring off into space because you're actually like working in your head right then and there, and people are like, hello, are you there? And you're like, oh, sorry, and they're like, you're writing in your head right now. I'm like, yeah, I am. So sorry. What were you saying?
Why are you here?
I'm really suddenly very busy. I need to go home.
I've written notebooks everywhere in our purses, name it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can't read my handwriting, so I don't do that. But I live with my iPad, which is I know we don't have a visual because we're doing a podcast, but this ratty cover is to my iPad because it is everything to me. I do this or I dictate. That's another big part of what I do because I will, when I'm writing scenes, I dictate the scenes, I act them out. And
I do the acting out too. It's weird. Fun. Like if people see you do it, they're like, what are you doing right now? Nothing. Leave me alone. Nothing's happening.
Don't look at me. I know.
I was gripping something really strangely once, and my husband's like, "What are you what?" I know he couldn't even come up with the words. I'm like, "Leave me alone. I'm writing." And I'm like, "It's for a scene."
Don't worry about it.
And he's like, "All right, fine." It just turns up the volume on the TV.
Well, it's some of my romance friends, romance writer friends, talk about how they're more intense scenes. They have to make sure all the parts are in the right place. And so it's just part of the craft. That's all you can say. It's just you do what you have to do to get the story on the page.
It's research.
Yes, I can just imagine that. Come on, honey, I got some research to do.
Watch TikTok. You'll see research. Yeah.
My goodness. Well, I believe we talked about everything that I had on my to-do list for us to discuss. So, and we are about at our half an hour. So for those of you, thank you, Denny. So for those of you who want to pick up your copy of Can't We Be Friends, you can go ahead and go to our show notes. There will be a link at bookshop.org where you can go ahead and pre-order your copy since this book doesn't come out until March 5th. As always, bookshop.org supports our wonderful authors who take the time out to come here on the show. It supports this podcast, but most importantly, it supports all of our indie bookstores out there. And Denny and Eliza, again, thank you so much for joining us. I am so glad we were able to pull this together and have this great conversation.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been great.
Yeah,
we're so excited for the book to come out. We hope everyone loves it.
Yes.
You will love it. You have to buy it first.
Yes.
Yes.
Go get the book.
Thank you.